Have you ever experienced the moment when you realize everything you've believed in crumbles beneath your feet? When a deep connection shatters, not because of a single incident, but because of an entire facade built on illusions and manipulations? What if I told you the one who believed the most in love, the one who was ready to sacrifice everything for a connection, becomes the very force that destroys the illusion? It's a strange, painful truth that often takes time to reveal itself. And it's not just an emotional moment, it's a profound shift, a psychological awakening, as if your mind suddenly sees through everything that once seemed real. How does this transformation happen? Let's dive into the painful yet empowering journey of the empath, waking up from the narcissist's grasp. When we speak about the moment a super empath walks away from a narcissist, it's more than just an emotional rupture. It's not simply the end of a relationship, it's the psychological equivalent of tectonic plates shifting beneath the very foundation of someone's world. Imagine the ground beneath you cracking open as everything you once thought was true collapses. This isn't just a breakup, it's the collapse of an entire framework, one built on illusions, projections, and unhealthy codependency. And here's the painful irony. It's the empath, the one who invested the most in the connection, who believed in its truth, who becomes the catalyst for its destruction. But this doesn't happen in a sudden burst of clarity. The super empath doesn't just wake up one morning and announce, "That's it, I'm done." No, it's a far more complicated journey. The empath endures, sometimes for far too long. Why? Because they believe. They believe in transformation, in the potential for change. They believe, perhaps too naively, that love, if pure enough, if unconditional enough, can break through the narcissist's cold, impenetrable walls. It's not weakness, it's a strength, though perhaps misdirected, but it's a strength grounded in moral courage. It takes a powerful soul to love someone who has no understanding of how to love in return. Yet something begins to shift. It's subtle at first, barely noticeable. Maybe it starts with a question that gnaws at the back of the mind. Why does it hurt so much to love this person? That question, if left unaddressed, grows louder. It transforms into a whisper of doubt, a quiet rebellion against everything they've been conditioned to believe. The empath begins to watch. They no longer just feel, they observe. They start comparing the narcissist's words to their actions, their promises to their repeated patterns. And gradually, the illusion begins to crack, piece by piece. This is what I mean by awakening. It's a form of psychological disillusionment, a slow peeling away of the false layers that once protected the empath's heart. What the empath once thought was vulnerability is revealed to be manipulation. What appeared to be charm is recognized as rehearsed charisma. The trauma they shared, which they believed was a bond, turns out to have been nothing more than bait. And once you see this, once you truly see it, everything changes. And now, let's explore the next step in this journey, the moment of breaking free and the aftermath of this awakening. The path to freedom is painful, but it's also the beginning of something powerful. Stay with me as we dive deeper. After the empath awakens, there is no turning back. The moment of realization is irreversible. For the narcissist, this shift is nothing short of catastrophic, as their entire power dynamic relies on the empath's unawareness. As long as the empath remains emotionally invested, second-guessing themselves, and over-identifying with the narcissist's narrative, the narcissist can maintain control. But once the empath wakes up, everything changes. They become unpredictable sovereign. And this newfound unpredictability is terrifying to the narcissist because a conscious, awakened individual is no longer someone they can manipulate. The awakening goes beyond psychological, it's existential. It's not just about realizing the true nature of the narcissist. It's about realizing who the empath truly is. The empath starts to remember the person they were before the gaslighting, before the identity erosion, before the emotional exploitation. They reconnect with their core values, their integrity, and the intuitive clarity that had been buried under years of emotional noise. This memory of selfhood is nothing short of revolutionary. It's like stepping out of a fog, restoring dignity, and creating internal distance. With that distance comes clarity. And with clarity comes power. This moment is a kind of philosophical epiphany, a moral awakening. The empath begins to recognize that compassion without boundaries is not virtue, it's self-betrayal. Staying in a toxic dynamic out of loyalty or fear is not love. It's psychological martyrdom. The empath reclaims their moral authority not by dominating or fighting back, but by refusing to participate in the lie any longer. They stop dancing to the narcissist's tune. They stop explaining themselves, and they stop giving their energy to someone who takes without ever giving back. The super empath walks away not in anger, not in revenge, but in truth. They walk in alignment with themselves, in a quiet dignity that speaks volumes. It's a kind of thunderous silence that says, I see now, and because I see, I can no longer stay. That moment when the empath closes the door is the moment the narcissist begins to unravel. Because the only power the narcissist ever truly had was the empath's belief in the illusion. Once that belief dies, the illusion collapses, and with it, the narcissist's control. The narcissist doesn't fear abandonment, they fear irrelevance. And when the empath leaves, fully conscious, fully aware, they're not just abandoned, they're exposed. The games they played no longer work. Their charm no longer enchants. Their manipulations fall flat, and all that's left is a person staring into the mirror, desperate for someone to reflect back a version of themselves they can recognize. But what happens when the narcissist is exposed? What does this moment truly mean for both the empath and the narcissist? Let's continue exploring this dramatic shift in power and its lasting effects on both sides. Stay tuned as we unravel the consequences of this awakening. As we left off, the narcissist's control begins to slip, and with the empath's departure, the mirror that once reflected their constructed self-image is shattered. This moment marks the beginning of the narcissist's existential crisis. What makes this so devastating for the narcissist is that the empath doesn't seek revenge. The empath's absence is the punishment in itself. The narcissist expected a fight, perhaps some kind of dramatic confrontation. Instead, they are met with silence. They anticipated tears, desperate pleas, but instead, they are met with indifference. This is the crux of the narcissist's downfall, not the loss of the person, but the loss of control. This is the wound the narcissist can never heal. They don't just mourn the empath, they mourn their own inability to manipulate and hold power over someone who has woken up to the truth. If there's one truth I want you to take from this, it's this. Awareness is power. When the empath sees the truth not just about the narcissist, but about themselves, that truth becomes their liberation. It's this clarity that sets them free. And in their freedom, the narcissist loses everything they've never truly appreciated. One of the most profound shifts that occur when a super empath walks away is the removal of the narcissist's psychological mirror. And this isn't just metaphorical. It's absolutely foundational to how narcissistic personalities function. You see, the narcissist doesn't have a stable, integrated sense of self. This is what makes them so deeply fragile, so dependent on others for their sense of identity. That mirror, the empath, is essential. It provides the narcissist with not only attention, often called narcissistic supply, but with validation, with a false sense of wholeness. The super empath, because of their depth and sincerity, doesn't just reflect the narcissist passively. They mirror back an idealized version of the narcissista, version that the narcissist desperately wants to believe is true. The empath sees potential, and in doing so, they project significance onto the narcissist that the narcissist cannot generate for themselves. It's intoxicating, and at first, it feels like a perfect match. But for the narcissist, this becomes an addiction. And as with any addiction, the loss of the source leads to collapse. When the empath walks away, the mirror shatters. There's no more reflection. No more validation. There is only the narcissist alone, forced to face the emptiness they've spent their entire life avoiding. And this isn't just uncomfortable for them, it's existentially threatening. Now, instead of being reflected back as charming, powerful, or special, they are confronted with the harsh truth. They are deeply insecure, emotionally undeveloped, and hollow at their core. The reality of this is unbearable for them. This loss of mirroring doesn't just damage the narcissist's ego, it destabilizes their entire identity. They're left without the only thing that made them feel whole. The mirror is gone, and so is the illusion. Now all that remains is the raw truth of who they truly are. But what happens when the narcissist finally faces the truth of their own emptiness? How do they cope with this confrontation with their deepest fears? Stay tuned as we explore the consequences of living in this exposed, uncomfortable truth. As the empath walks away, the narcissist's sense of self begins to unravel. What was once a carefully constructed facade collapses, leaving only emptiness. It destabilizes their entire personality structure, like a building without internal support, relying solely on external forces to remain upright. Imagine a grand structure built to perfection, standing tall because of the surrounding support. But once that support is gone, the building doesn't simply lean, it implodes. This is the psychological equivalent of what happens to a narcissist when the empath walks away, never to return. At first, the narcissist will panic. They will scramble, desperate to find another mirror to reflect their distorted image. Often, this leads them to jump into a new relationship with alarming speed. But these replacements are never enough. The empath's reflection can't be replicated. The super empath offers something that others cannot: a depth of presence, an almost spiritual connection, a willingness to see the soul beneath the mask. And when that gift is withdrawn, it's not just a loss the narcissist feels, it's a sense of annihilation. Philosophically speaking, this is when the narcissist faces what existentialists call the abyss. Without their external validation, they are left staring into a void where their sense of self should be. Rather than confront this terrifying emptiness with courage and humility, the narcissist often falls back into old patterns: more manipulation, more projection, more self-deception. But the damage is done. Now, whether consciously or unconsciously, the narcissist knows that the one person who truly saw them for who they are has left. And they weren't left for someone else, they were left for no one. And that's the part that stings the most. The empath didn't walk away into another relationship. They didn't replace the narcissist with someone new. No, they walked away into self-respect. And this, the narcissist can't rationalize. They can't fit it into their usual narrative of competition, jealousy, or winning. It wasn't about a victory or defeat. It was about awakening. The empath didn't just stop loving the narcissist. They started loving themselves. And once that happens, the narcissist's power dissolves. This is why the empath's silence, their absence, becomes so deafening. It's not just quiet. It echoes through the narcissist's psyche like a scream. It forces them to ask the questions they've been avoiding their entire lives. Why did they leave? What did I do? Who am I without them? But here's the cruel twist. The narcissist lacks the emotional tools to answer these questions. Not honestly, and certainly not yet. So, they spiral, they lash out, they blame, they regress. And all the while, they feel the unbearable weight of that missing mirror, the empath. So, what happens when the narcissist is left to confront their own emptiness? What becomes of them when the games no longer work? The next stage is both tragic and revealing. Let's explore how the narcissist reacts to the final exposure of their true self. As we saw earlier, the empath's absence leaves the narcissist reeling. But there's an even deeper impact that takes place when the super empath walks away a loss that extends far beyond emotional supply. The narcissist's identity is built entirely on external validation, on the mirror that reflects their image. But the empath, who no longer participates in the narcissist's story, doesn't need that mirror. Their identity is anchored in something far more stable: truth, values, and a deep understanding of themselves. That's the paradox. The one who was once most vulnerable, whose self-worth was defined by the narcissist's approval, becomes the most powerful. Meanwhile, the one who seemed most in control, the narcissist, reveals themselves as utterly dependent on external reflections for their sense of self. So, when the super empath walks away, it's not just a deprivation of supply, it's a deprivation of identity, coherence, and self. And that is a loss the narcissist can't process properly, because grief requires humility, and humility requires depth. The depth the narcissist has spent their entire life avoiding. But when the empath walks away, something else even more devastating occurs, though it's often invisible to the untrained eye. The narcissist loses control of the narrative. Narcissists survive by controlling the story, their story, your story, and most importantly, the shared story. They weave a tale in which they are the hero, the victim, the misunderstood genius, or the long-suffering lover, whatever serves their ego in the moment. The empath, deeply attuned to nuance, understands this distortion at a gut level, even if it takes a while for the conscious mind to catch up. But once the empath walks away fully and completely, the narcissist can no longer control that story, and for them, that's a psychological death blow. The narrative is everything. For the narcissist, it's not just about reputation or appearances, though those certainly matter. It's about preserving their identity. They construct an identity that depends on others buying into their carefully curated image. If they can keep the empath inside that story, they control how events are remembered, how pain is explained, and how blame is assigned. But when the empath steps outside that frame, when they reclaim authorship of their own experience, the narcissist is exposed for what they truly are: not a misunderstood savior, but an architect of emotional chaos. Let's dive deeper philosophically. The German philosopher Nietzsche spoke about the concept of resentiment, the simmering resentment of those who see themselves as victims of another's power. Narcissists live in this state perpetually. They feel victimized by the empath's autonomy, by their refusal to stay small, by their unwillingness to shrink to fit the narcissist's mold. And so, they rewrite the story again, attempting to regain control. Now that the narcissist is exposed, how do they cope with the unraveling of their constructed world? Let's explore the psychological games they play to try and restore their fragile sense of power. As we explored earlier, when the narcissist loses control of the narrative, they begin to spiral. But what happens when the empath, having awakened to the truth, finally steps forward to reclaim their story? The narcissist, in their desperate attempt to avoid responsibility, distorts the facts. He abandoned me. He was always too emotional. They never appreciated how much I did. These distortions are more than just lies. They are survival mechanisms, tools the narcissist uses to dodge the uncomfortable reality of their own actions. These lies allow them to avoid confronting the damage they've caused. But the empath, once awakened, begins to tell the truth. And truth, as Solzhenitsyn taught us, is a force more powerful than any oppression. At first, the empath might speak quietly, perhaps just to themselves. This is what happened. This is how I was gaslit. This is how my intuition was turned against me. Slowly, this alternative narrative begins to take shape. It gains momentum. It becomes the real story. anchored firmly in reality. And in doing so, it takes away the one thing the narcissist fears more than being disliked: being seen. Narcissists operate in the realm of perception. They don't need to be good people, they only need to appear to be good. This is why image is everything to them. But the empath, by reclaiming the narrative, shatters that carefully constructed image. The narcissist mythology is replaced with hard facts, not revenge, not slander, just honesty. And honesty, in its raw form, is brutal because it can't be negotiated with. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it simply stands there, calm and unwavering, like a mirror that refuses to distort. And this is what metaphorically kills the narcissist, because their sense of control is tied directly to the empath's silence. As long as the empath is silent, confused, or questioning their reality, the narcissist can spin their story. They can convince others and even themselves that they were the wronged party. But once the empath steps outside of that loop, the narcissist's grip slips not just on others, but on their own mind. Psychologists call this narrative fragmentation, the collapse of a coherent identity. The narcissist no longer knows which version of the story to tell because the audience has changed. And once the audience changes, the narcissist's performance falters. What's critical here is the power of the empath's clarity. When someone who has been through emotional manipulation emerges with calm, insightful understanding, it carries authority. It exposes the lies, and it resonates. People begin to listen, even if they don't say it out loud. They start to question the narrative they've been told, and that ripple effect, once set in motion, is impossible to contain. This is why walking away isn't just an act of self-preservation. It's an act of resistance. It's quiet, it's subtle, and it doesn't need to be loud or violent. The empath doesn't have to fight to be believed. They simply need to speak the truth. And once that truth is spoken, the narcissist's power starts to crumble. But what happens when the narcissist can no longer manipulate their surroundings? How do they react when their power is completely stripped away? Let's dive into the final stages of their unraveling. As we've seen, when the empath finally walks away, they take with them something the narcissist cannot replace: the truth. The narcissist, once so reliant on their carefully crafted story, begins to crumble under the weight of their own lies. Lies can only survive in darkness, and the empath, no longer in the dark, brings that darkness to light. But here's the tragic part for the narcissist. They often underestimate the empath's power until it's too late. The narcissist believes they can smear, discredit, or replace the empath, but they cannot erase the truth. They can't undo the moment when the empath reclaims the pen and begins to write their own story, a story without distortion, without delusion, and most painfully of all, without the narcissist in it. In the end, the narcissist doesn't just lose control, they lose the illusion of control. And when the story no longer revolves around them, when they are no longer the author, the hero, or even the victim, they are left with a role they never prepared for: the antagonist in someone else's liberation. But when a super empath walks away, something else happens. Something the narcissist never anticipates, yet fears more than anything else: exposure, abandonment, or even worse, indifference. The empath becomes utterly indifferent. And that indifference, that absolute emotional detachment, is catastrophic for the narcissist's fragile sense of self. Narcissists thrive on your reactions. They feed on your joy, your confusion, your pain, and your outrage. Any response, any emotional engagement is better than none at all. But when the super empath cuts emotional ties completely and offers nothing, no reaction, no engagement, no validation, the empath, at a psychological level, is denying the narcissist oxygen. This is not to be confused with the silent treatment, which narcissists often use as a tool of manipulation. No, this is something entirely different. It's not withholding to punish, it's an absence born of clarity. The empath has seen the pattern. They've lived through the gaslighting, the devaluation, the idealization, and the discard. They've studied the terrain and finally realized that there's nothing left to salvage. Not because they lack compassion, but because they understand that pouring empathy into a void doesn't lead to healing, it leads to erosion. The narcissist cannot grasp this kind of detachment within their worldview. To them, emotional intensity equals relevance. So, if you're angry with them, they think, I still matter. If you're defending yourself, they think, I still have power. But when you walk away and feel nothing, when you look at them and see a closed chapter rather than a gaping wound, that's when their world starts to unravel. Their sense of self is entirely relational. They don't know who they are outside the reactions of others. And when you stop reacting altogether, they are left with nothing. As the narcissist faces the emptiness within, what happens next? How do they cope with the loss of their own reflection? Let's continue this journey and explore the final unraveling of the narcissist's identity. As we've seen, when the empath walks away, they no longer mirror the narcissist's distorted image. Instead, they hold up a blank slate, forcing the narcissist to confront what's actually a harsh reality they can no longer avoid. And that's terrifying for them. Indifference is not cruelty. It's not bitterness. It's transcendence. It's what happens when the empath reclaims their autonomy so fully that the narcissist becomes irrelevant. They no longer occupy any mental or emotional space in the empath's world. The narcissist's manipulations fall flat. Their attempts to provoke bounce off, leaving them powerless. The empath has risen above the battlefield, and in doing so, they commit the ultimate act of resistance. They deny the narcissist their significance. But let's dig deeper, because this isn't just about interpersonal dynamics, it's about spiritual and psychological evolution. Carl Jung believed that true individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated self, requires a confrontation with the shadow. For the empath, that shadow often includes the desire to fix, to rescue, and to absorb another's pain. Walking away from the narcissist isn't just about escaping theme, it's about confronting that part of the self that once equated suffering with love. When the empath reaches the point of indifference, it signals not apathy, but mastery. It's the moment they face their inner chaos and emerge stronger. The empath acknowledges that their value does not depend on being needed or praised, and that realization is what sets them free. Because once you're free internally, no one can trap you externally. This is why the narcissist crumbles not because the empath harmed them, but because they stopped playing the game. That's the great irony. The narcissist often believes they're the one discarding the empath. They mistake withdrawal for victory. But it's not until weeks, sometimes months later, that they realize something crucial. They've lost something irreplaceable. They may cycle through new sources, desperately searching for that same depth of connection, that same emotional richness, but they can never replicate what they had with the super empath. What they had wasn't just attention, it was authenticity. And now, it's gone. The absence of the empath becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the narcissist sees their emptiness not as a vague discomfort, but as a terrifying clarity. The empath's silence, their indifference, forces a reckoning. And here's the philosophical twist. The narcissist could, in theory, use this moment to grow, to confront their own deficiencies, to evolve, but most don't, because growth requires humility. And humility is something the narcissist cannot afford. So, the empath moves forward lighter, wiser, and more whole, not because they sought revenge, but because they chose peace over performance. They no longer measure their worth through the eyes of someone who could never truly see them. And that, in the end, is the narcissist's greatest undoing. It's not a loud confrontation, it's not a final word. It's the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who no longer needs the narcissist to validate their existence. But what happens when the narcissist is forced to confront their own lack of self-awareness? Can they evolve, or is the cycle doomed to repeat? Let's take a deeper look at how the narcissist tries to salvage their crumbling identity and what it means for the empath's journey of self-discovery.